story on this weekend where we celebrate our fathers and Juneteenth. I hope you have festivities in your schedule and just enjoy what will take place every moment. And the book that we're going to review is a picture book of Harriet Tubman. By David Adler, illustrated by Samuel Bird. Harriet Tubman was born into slavery on a Maryland plantation in 1820. So she would have been 110 years old. A rebellious child, she did not always do as she was told. She hated being a slave and escaped to the north on the Underground Railroad in 1849. During the next 10 years, she used the money she earned at odd jobs to return to the South and lead about 300 slaves to freedom. Called General Tubman for her strength and bravery, Harriet went on to work as a nurse and spy for the Northern Army in the Civil War. And she was a woman who fought for the right to vote and helped to open a home for poor and elderly Black people after her senior years when she became an elder. David Adler tells about Harriet Tubman's life and character, showing why she was admired and loved by the many people who knew her. She was a conductor on the railway to freedom, a Moses to and for her people. Hey, I tell you, we need more Moses out here, and we need more to stand up for what's right. And it's never too late, because you have a voice, you have a brain, you have ability to do great things. Harriet Tubman was born in 1820 or 21 on a large plantation in Dorchester County, Maryland. Although the plantation had a big house with many rooms and fine furniture, Harriet was born in a small one-room log hut far behind the big house. The hut she was born in had a dirt floor, no windows, and no furniture. Harriet was the sixth of 11 children. Her father, Benjamin Ross, and her mother, Harriet Green, were both slaves. They were owned by Edward Brodess. He owned Harriet Tubman too. The slaves worked hard all day, but they weren't paid. Harriet hated slavery. She was wild and often beaten. She was not willing to do as she was told. One time when Harriet was hired out, quote unquote, to work for someone else, she saw a bowl filled with lumps of sugar. She said later, "Now you know I never had anything good. No sweet, no sugar, and that sugar right by me did look so nice." She took one lump from the bowl. Oh my goodness. Harriet's mistress, Miss Susan, saw her take it and chased her with a whip. Harriet ran from the house and hid with the pigs. She ate potato peelings and other scraps until she was so hungry she had to go back. When she did, she was whipped again and again. Edward Brodess sold lumber, apples, wheat, and corn that grew on his plantation. Sometimes he took slaves he owned and sold them, too, down the river to plantations farther south. Harriet saw two of her sisters taken away in chains. Harriet was afraid that one day she would be sold out. When Harriet was a young girl, abolitionists, people against slavery, were beginning to speak out and protest. Abolitionist newspapers were being published. Nat Turner, a young slave, knew how Moses had led the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. He hoped to lead his people out of slavery too. And in 1831, he started a rebellion. Slave owners, their wives, and their children were killed. Nat Turner and others were caught and hanged. Harriet dreamed that one day a true Moses would lead her to freedom. In 1835, Harriet came between a master and a slave who was running away. The master threw a metal weight at the runaway. It hit Harriet instead and almost killed her. Harriet had a deep cut in her forehead that never fully healed. For the next almost 80 years, Harriet suffered from severe headaches and sleeping spells, but she survived and thanked God for saving her. After the accident, she often prayed. In 1844, Harriet married John Tubman, a free man. They lived in his cabin near the Brodus plantation. Harriet was thinking about running away. She wanted John to join her, but he wouldn't. He said that if she ran off, he would tell her master, and soon the patrollers and their dogs would be after her. But Harriet had made up in her mind. She started planning her escape. Slaves often sang in the fields. The afternoon before Harriet ran off, she sang too. And in the words of her song was a message to the other slaves. When that chariot comes, I'm going to leave you. I'm bound for the promised land. For Harriet Tubman, the promised land was north, where she would be free. Harriet escaped at night with 3 of her brothers. They had no food, no money, and they didn't know where to go. Soon after they left, Harriet's brothers decided to turn back. They made Harriet go back too. 2 nights later, Harriet went off alone. If I had a right to liberty, I had a right to liberty or death, she said after her escape. If I could not have one, I would have the other. Harriet ran to the house of a white woman who had once offered to help her. The woman told Harriet which house to go to next. The people in the second house directed Harriet to go to another house farther north. Harriet was traveling on what was known as the Underground Railroad. Each stop on the railroad was the house of someone who believed slavery was wrong and was willing to help runaway slaves find their way to freedom. Harriet hid during the day. She traveled at night until she reached Pennsylvania. There was a law in that state against owning slaves. This bug is enjoying this book too. And the birds are. Harriet Tubman was a free woman. She felt like a new person. She said later, the sun came like gold through the trees. Just like today, you see the golden sunlight. And over the fields, and I felt like I was in heaven. Yeah, we can't take it for granted, the freedom that we can enjoy right now. I'm telling you, no food, no money, no direction where to go, but she made it, and so many others made it. During the years between 1850 and 1860, Harriet worked as a cook, dishwasher, and cleaning woman. She used much of the money she earned to make 19 trips south to lead about 300 slaves to freedom. Many of them were her own relatives. When I just read, she worked as a dishwasher. Remember yesterday how the 4 women at the Langley Laboratory worked as computers? It's something how those were nouns, right? She worked as, like, saying like a typewriter or as a lawnmower, just treated as objects. But beneath all of that, there's brilliance. That's why you want to take advantage of the talents, the gifts, the time that you have, so that you can cultivate and help others toward their emancipation, their ultimate freedom. There she was. Harriet took them from one safe house to the next. Sometimes she led them as far as Canada. She was a conductor the Underground Railroad. At times, Harriet disguised herself as a weak old woman or as a man. She used songs as a secret code. When the runaways were hiding and it was safe to come out, she sang a joyful song. Hail, oh hail, ye happy spirits. The runaway slaves always recognized Harriet's deep, husky voice. Once slaves began their journey north with Harriet, she wouldn't let them turn back. When slaves were too scared to go on, Harriet pointed a gun at their heads and said, "You go on, or you die." Years later, Harriet said proudly, "I never ran my train off the track. I never lost a passenger." Harriet was called Moses because she led her people out of slavery. There was a huge reward waiting for anyone who called her, but no one ever did. In 1858, Harriet met John Brown, a leader in the movement to end slavery. He called her one of the best and bravest people in America. He called her General Tubman. I look like I have a scarf. I'm never going to look at my jogging scarves the same. Come on, you run to freedom. Come on, help others. In November 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president, and 11 southern states withdrew from the United States. They didn't want Lincoln, a man who hated slavery, as their leader. The war between the North and the South, the Civil War, began on April 12, 1861. During the war, Harriet Tubman worked as a nurse and a spy for the Northern Army. She went into enemy territory and led hundreds of slaves to freedom. She helped care for slaves who ran north during the fighting. In December 1865, soon after the Civil War ended, an amendment to the U.S. Constitution was passed. Slavery was no longer allowed in the United States. After the war, Harriet Tubman returned to her home in Auburn, New York. John Tubman had died in 1867. In 1869, Harriet married a former slave and soldier for the Northern Army, Nelson Davis. In Auburn, she went from house to house selling vegetables. Wherever she went, she was asked to tell about her adventures on the Underground Railroad. Harriet Tubman helped many former slaves who came to her in Auburn. She supported the suffragist movement, the fight for the right of women to vote in the United States. I tell you, what a mighty, courageous woman. Harriet helped establish a home in Auburn for sick, poor, and homeless black people. When she moved into that home in 1911, she was old and weak. "I can hear them bells are ringing. I can hear the angels singing," she said. Soon after that, on March 10th, 1913, she was more than 90 years old when she died. Harriet Tubman was a brave, courageous woman. She was admired and loved by the many people who knew her. She was a conductor on the railway to freedom, a Moses to her people. I say, to have that type of courage, to have that type of resilience, it's in us. David Adler, who was the author of this book, had been hailed as an expert mixture of facts and personality in his picture book biographies. Mr. Adler is also the author of the first biography series for readers age 7 to 11, as well as a number of novels. He and his wife live in New York with his 3 sons. And Samuel Bird, the illustrator, is a painter, muralist, and he has 6 children, lives in Philadelphia with his wife and their daughter. Well, I tell you, this is very inspiring. We have work to do, guys. Even on this, the 3rd commemoration of Juneteenth as a federal holiday. Listen, we have work to do. and let's continue and know that there are so many others who are suffering. There are so many people who are still bound in mental and emotional slavery, and we have to help them out. We have to assist them in their liberty so that they can become the people that they were created to be. All right, enjoy the day.